The thunder rolled across the vast plains of Arizona Territory as Forrest Hayes crouched in the doorway of his barn, watching lightning illuminate the dark sky. It was April 1877, and the spring storm had come with sudden fury, driving him from the fields and into shelter as rain pounded the parched earth of his ranch outside Old Tucson. He had just settled his horses when he heard a moan that wasn't the wind, a distinctly human sound coming from the hayloft. "Hello," Forrest called, reaching for the lantern hanging by the door. His calloused hand gripped the handle firmly as he raised it high, casting an amber glow through the shadows. "Someone there." Another moan answered him, followed by a gasp that turned into a muffled cry. Forrest took the wooden ladder 2 rungs at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. As his head cleared the loft floor, the lantern light fell upon a woman huddled in the hay, her face contorted in pain, dress soaked with rainwater and something that made Forrest's breath catch in his throat. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, moving toward her. She was young, perhaps 20, with honey-brown hair plastered to her forehead. Her hands clutched her swollen belly as another contraction seized her. Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes deep blue like the mountain lakes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Please," she gasped. "Please help me." Forrest set the lantern down, kneeling beside her in the hay. "I'm Forrest Hayes. This is my ranch. What's your name?" "Charlotte," she managed between ragged breaths. "Charlotte Morgan. Miss Morgan, you're having a baby." She nodded, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "I know. I didn't," her words cut off as another contraction gripped her, and she cried out, clutching blindly for something to hold. Forrest offered his hand without thinking, and she grasped it with surprising strength. "I'm going to help you," Forrest said, fighting to keep his voice steady. At 30, he'd broken wild horses, fought off bandits, and weathered droughts that had driven weaker men to ruin, but he'd never delivered a baby. "But I need to get you down from here, get you to the house." Charlotte shook her head vehemently. "No time," she gasped. "It's coming, the baby's coming now." Forrest's mind raced. The nearest doctor was in Old Tucson, a good hour's ride away. Impossible in this storm, impossible with a woman in labor. He'd helped birth calves and foals, but this was different. This was a woman alone in pain, with no one but a stranger to help her bring a new life into the world. "All right," he said, shrugging off his canvas jacket and rolling up his sleeves. "I'm going to help you, Charlotte. You and your baby are going to be just fine." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. Charlotte fought with every ounce of her strength, following Forrest's hesitant instructions as he recalled what little he knew about childbirth from watching his sister-in-law deliver her children years ago. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, a different kind of tempest was breaking. "I can see the head," Forrest announced, his voice thick with emotion. "You need to push again, Charlotte. One more big push." Charlotte gathered her remaining strength, gripping Forrest's hand and the hay beneath her as she bore down with a primal cry that echoed through the barn. And then a miracle. A tiny, slippery body slid into Forrest's waiting hands, and a new cry joined the thunder. "It's a boy," Forrest said, tears blurring his vision as he quickly wiped the infant's face and wrapped him in his clean shirt. "You have a son, Charlotte." He placed the squalling infant on Charlotte's chest, and the exhausted woman looked down at her child with wonder, her fingers tracing his tiny features. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, my little one." Forrest watched them, this woman and child who had appeared in his barn like a dream, and felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. He had never imagined himself as a father. His life as a solitary rancher had seemed set. But as he helped Charlotte deliver the afterbirth and made her as comfortable as possible, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. "I need to get you both to the house," Forrest said once Charlotte had fed her son for the first time. "This is no place for a new mother and baby." "I can't impose," Charlotte protested weakly. "We'll move on as soon as you're not going anywhere tonight," Forrest interrupted firmly. "Or tomorrow. You need rest and care, and so does he." He nodded toward the sleeping infant. "No arguments, Miss Morgan. I'm a stubborn man." Too exhausted to protest further, Charlotte allowed Forrest to carry her and the baby down from the loft. He settled them in his own bed in the small but sturdy ranch house, building up the fire and brewing tea from his meager supplies. As Charlotte drifted off to sleep, her son nestled securely against her. Forrest sat in the wooden chair by the bed, watching over them both. Dawn broke clear and golden after the storm. Forrest had dozed in the chair, waking whenever the baby fussed or Charlotte stirred. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, he found Charlotte watching him, her eyes clearer now though dark circles shadowed them. "You stayed," she said softly. "Of course I did," Forrest replied, stretching his stiff muscles. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, grateful." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us." Forrest cleared his throat, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Charlotte said firmly. "Not everyone would have helped a strange woman giving birth in their barn." She looked down at her son, who was beginning to wake. "I named him last night while you were stoking the fire." "Oh." Forrest found himself strangely invested in her answer. "Nathaniel," she said. "It means gift from God, and that's what he is, what you both are to me." Forrest felt heat rise to his face. "It's a fine name," he said. "Now you should eat something. I'll make breakfast." Over a simple meal of biscuits and bacon, Charlotte began to tell her story. She had come from Missouri, traveling west with her husband, Daniel, who had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. But Daniel had fallen ill and died in New Mexico territory, leaving Charlotte alone and pregnant. With nowhere else to go, she had continued west, following Daniel's original plan to reach family friends in California. "I was trying to make it to the next town when the storm hit," she explained. "I saw your barn and just wanted shelter for the night." She looked down at Nathaniel, suckling at her breast. "I didn't expect him to come so soon. He wasn't due for another 2 weeks." Forrest listened, his heart aching for this brave young woman who had endured so much. "You're welcome to stay here until you're strong enough to travel," he offered. "It's not much, but it's dry and safe." Charlotte's eyes met his. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Your kindness means more than I can say." The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Forrest tended his ranch, the cattle, the horses, the small vegetable garden, while Charlotte recovered her strength. She insisted on helping where she could, cooking meals that put Forrest's bachelor fare to shame, and keeping the small house tidier than it had been in years. Nathaniel grew stronger by the day, his lusty cries giving way to curious coos as he took in the world around him. Forrest found himself drawn to the infant, fascinated by his tiny fingers and the way his blue eyes, so like his mother's, tracked movement. In the evenings, after supper, Forrest sometimes held Nathaniel while Charlotte rested, marveling at how perfectly the child fit in the crook of his arm. A week passed, then 2. Charlotte mentioned her journey to California less frequently, and Forrest never pressed her about her plans. Something unspoken was growing between them, a comfortable companionship that neither was eager to disrupt. It was on a warm evening in early May when Forrest finally broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Nathaniel was asleep in a makeshift cradle Forrest had constructed from an old apple crate. "Charlotte," Forrest began, his voice unusually hesitant, "have you given any more thought to your plans?" "For you and Nathaniel." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," she finally admitted. "The friends in California, they're my husband's friends, not mine. I've never met them. I don't even know if they'd welcome us." Forrest nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "You could stay here," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not forever if you don't want to, but until you figure out what's next. The ranch is doing well enough. There's room." Charlotte looked at him, surprise and something softer in her expression. "Why would you offer that?" "You barely know me." Forrest met her gaze steadily. "I know you're strong, I know you're kind, I know you're a good mother to Nathaniel." He paused. "And I know the house feels more like a home with you both in it." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears and she blinked them away. I'm a widow with a newborn child, Mr. Hayes. I have nothing to offer but complications. Forrest, he corrected gently. And you're wrong. You've brought life back to this place, and not just with Nathaniel. He gestured to the ranch around them. I've been alone here for 5 years since my brother moved his family to Colorado. I didn't realize how lonely it was until you came. Charlotte reached out hesitantly, placing her hand on his arm. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Forrest said simply. Stay, Charlotte. At least for now. She nodded, a small smile curving her lips. For now, she agreed. As spring blossomed into summer, Charlotte and Nathaniel became fixtures at the Hayes Ranch. Charlotte proved herself not just a skilled homemaker, but a capable ranch hand as well, having grown up on a small farm in Missouri. She helped Forrest with the garden, expanded it to include herbs and more vegetables, and even learned to help with the horses, showing a natural way with the animals that impressed Forrest. Nathaniel thrived under their joint care. By July, he was smiling and gurgling, reaching for Forrest whenever he came into view. The first time Nathaniel had fallen asleep on Forrest's chest, Charlotte had found them both dozing in the rocking chair on the porch, the baby's small hand clutching Forrest's shirt. She had stood watching them, her heart full of emotions she wasn't ready to name. It was Forrest who first acknowledged the shift in their relationship. They had ridden into Old Tucson together, Nathaniel secured in a sling against Charlotte's chest, to purchase supplies and introduce Charlotte to the small community. As they walked down the town's dusty Main Street, Forrest found himself placing a protective hand at the small of Charlotte's back, nodding to acquaintances who looked curiously at the woman and child accompanying the usually solitary rancher. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Jenkins, didn't bother hiding her interest. Well, Forrest Hayes, aren't you full of surprises, she said, peering at Charlotte and Nathaniel. And who might these lovely folks be? Forrest hesitated only a moment. This is Charlotte and Nathaniel, he said, his voice steady. My family. Charlotte's startled glance met his, but she didn't contradict him. Later, as they loaded their purchases into the wagon for the ride home, she finally spoke of it. Family, she asked quietly, adjusting Nathaniel's sling. Forrest helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. It seemed simpler than explaining, he said, though they both knew it was more than that. Is that what we are? Charlotte pressed, her eyes searching his. A family. Forrest climbed up beside her and took up the reins. I'd like us to be, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I know it hasn't been long and you're still grieving Daniel. I don't expect anything, Charlotte, but I care for you both more than I thought possible. Charlotte was quiet for so long that Forrest feared he had overstepped, but then her hand found his on the seat between them. I care for you too, she whispered. More than I should, perhaps. It was enough for now, this quiet acknowledgement of feelings growing between them. As they drove back to the ranch, the summer sun warming their shoulders, Forrest felt a hope he hadn't dared to nurture begin to blossom. The seasons turned, summer heat giving way to the milder days of autumn. Nathaniel grew, learning to roll over and sit up, his personality emerging stubborn like his mother, observant like the man who was becoming his father in all the ways that mattered. Charlotte and Forrest's relationship deepened, built on shared work and quiet evenings, on the foundation of trust that had formed that stormy April night. Their first kiss came on a crisp October evening. They had spent the day harvesting the last of the garden, preserving vegetables for the winter ahead. Nathaniel had gone to sleep easily, exhausted from a day spent watching the activity from a blanket spread in the shade. Charlotte stood at the kitchen basin, washing the day's dirt from her hands, when she felt Forrest's presence behind her. Let me, he said, taking the towel and gently drying her hands. His touch was reverent, his calloused fingers tracing the lines of her palms as if memorizing them. Charlotte turned to face him, her breath catching at the intensity in his green eyes. Forrest, she whispered, not quite a question. He cupped her face in his hands, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Charlotte responded, her arms sliding around his waist, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken longing finally finding expression. When they pulled apart, both breathing unevenly, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," he admitted. Charlotte smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I've wanted you to." That night marked a turning point. Though Charlotte still slept in the bedroom with Nathaniel and Forrest in the small second room, their days were filled with casual touches, stolen kisses, and the growing certainty that what they had found together was rare and precious. As November brought cooler weather, Forrest rode into town alone one day, returning with a small package he wouldn't let Charlotte see. That evening, after Nathaniel was asleep, he asked her to join him by the fire. "I've been thinking," he began, taking her hands in his, "about us. About Nathaniel, about the future." Charlotte felt her heart quicken. "Have you?" Forrest nodded, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Charlotte, I know you came to my life in an unusual way. I know you've experienced loss that no one should have to bear. But finding you and Nathaniel in my barn that night, it was like finding pieces of myself I didn't know were missing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. I'm just a rancher with land that needs tending and a heart that's yours if you want it." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. "Charlotte Morgan, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Nathaniel, not just in practice but in name?" Charlotte stared at the ring, then at the man offering it, tears blurring her vision. "You want to marry me, to raise Nathaniel as your son, more than anything," Forrest said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you both. I want us to be a real family." Charlotte threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him backward. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you, Forrest Hayes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Old Tucson, with Nathaniel cradled in Charlotte's arms throughout the ceremony. The few guests, neighbors, and the handful of townsfolk Forrest counted as friends beamed as the unlikely family formalized their bond. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Forrest kissed Charlotte with a reverence that brought sighs from the women present. Then he took Nathaniel from her arms, holding the boy close as he addressed the small gathering. "Most men are fortunate enough to find a wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I was blessed to find a family." He looked down at Nathaniel, who reached up to pat his cheek with a chubby hand. "This boy may not have my blood, but he has my name and my heart. From this day forward, Nathaniel Morgan Hayes is my son in every way that matters." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Forrest sealed this vow with a gentle kiss to Nathaniel's forehead. Life, as a married couple, brought changes to the ranch. Forrest built an addition to the house through the winter months, a larger bedroom for them and a nursery for Nathaniel, with plans for more rooms as their family grew. Charlotte's cooking and homemaking skills transformed the once Spartan ranch house into a warm, inviting home that neighbors began to visit more frequently. Nathaniel's first birthday arrived with the spring, celebrated with a small party that included the closest neighbors. The boy was walking now, unsteady but determined, with Forrest's patient hands always ready to catch him when he stumbled. He had begun calling Forrest Pa and Charlotte Ma, simple words that filled both adults with indescribable joy. As Charlotte tucked an exhausted Nathaniel into his crib that night, she felt Forrest's arms encircle her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they gazed down at their sleeping son. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Forrest murmured. "A year since that storm brought you to me." Charlotte leaned back against his solid chest. "The best year of my life," she said softly. "Thank you for finding us that night, for helping deliver him, for becoming his father." Forrest turned her in his arms, kissing her deeply before drawing back with a smile that held a hint of mischief. "Speaking of children," he said, "how would you feel about giving Nathaniel a brother or sister?" Charlotte's eyes widened. "Are you asking if I want more children?" "I'm asking if you're ready to try," Forrest clarified, his hands gentle on her waist. I'd like a big family, Charlotte. This house has been too empty for too long. Charlotte smiled, twining her arms around his neck. I'd like that too, she admitted. Very much. That night, as they lay together in the soft darkness of their bedroom, their lovemaking held a new purpose, a shared dream of expanding the family that had begun so unexpectedly in a storm-lashed barn. By the following winter, Charlotte was heavy with child again, her belly round beneath her woolen dresses. Nathaniel, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his mother's changing body, placing his small hands on her stomach to feel his siblings' movements. "Baby," he would say solemnly, looking up at Forrest for confirmation. "That's right, son," Forrest would answer, his own hand joining Nathaniel's. "Your baby brother or sister is in there, growing strong like you." The ranch prospered along with the family. Forrest had expanded his herd and added more grazing land, hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work now that Charlotte was expecting again. Their home was known throughout the area for its hospitality, with Charlotte often sending Forrest to deliver food to sick neighbors or hosting Sunday dinners after church. It was on a cold January evening in 1879 that Charlotte went into labor with their second child. Unlike Nathaniel's dramatic birth, this one happened in the comfort of their home, with the midwife from town in attendance and Forrest pacing anxiously in the kitchen, keeping a sleepy Nathaniel occupied. When the midwife finally called him in, Forrest found Charlotte propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "She has your eyes." Forrest approached the bed almost reverently, Nathaniel balanced on his hip. As he gazed down at the tiny red face of his daughter by blood this time, he felt the same overwhelming love that had flooded him when he'd first held Nathaniel. "She's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "What shall we call her?" Charlotte smiled. "I was thinking Helena after your mother. Helena Hayes." Forrest nodded, emotion choking his words. "Helena," he repeated. "It's beautiful." He settled Nathaniel beside Charlotte, watching as the boy peered curiously at his new sister. "Baby," Nathaniel said decisively, reaching out a gentle finger to touch Helena's cheek. "That's right," Forrest confirmed. "Your baby sister. You'll help us take care of her, won't you?" Nathaniel nodded solemnly, his blue eyes so like Charlotte's, serious with this new responsibility. As Forrest looked at his family, his wife, his son, his newborn daughter, he marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them together. From that stormy night when a desperate woman had sought shelter in his barn to this moment of pure contentment, his life had been transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The years flowed by like the streams that cut through the Arizona landscape, sometimes rushing, sometimes meandering, but always moving forward. Nathaniel grew from a toddler to a boy, tall for his age, with his mother's blue eyes and a quiet confidence that made Forrest swell with pride. Helena, or Ellie as they called her, was her father's daughter, stubborn, with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. They were joined by another son, Michael, in 1881, and finally by twin girls, Sarah and Hannah, in 1884. The Hayes Ranch became known for its fine horses, prosperous cattle, and the lively brood of children who made the once quiet homestead ring with laughter and occasional squabbles. Through it all, the bond between Forrest and Nathaniel remained special. Though Forrest loved all his children equally, there was something unique in his relationship with his eldest, the boy, who had made him a father before he even knew he wanted to be one. When Nathaniel was 10, he came to Forrest with questions about his birth. Charlotte had never hidden the truth from him, but as he grew older, he wanted to understand more about the man who had given him life. Was he a good man? Nathaniel asked as he helped Forrest repair a fence on a warm autumn afternoon. "My first father." Forrest straightened, wiping sweat from his brow as he considered his answer. "Your mother says he was," he said honestly. "He had dreams of making a better life for you both. That's why they were heading west when he got sick." Nathaniel nodded, his young face serious. "But you're my real father," he said, not a question but a statement. Forrest's heart swelled. "I am," he confirmed. "Not by blood but by choice. I chose you and your mother that night in the barn, and it's the best choice I ever made." Nathaniel seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to the task of holding nails for Forrest. After a few minutes of companionable silence, he spoke again. "I'm glad it was your barn we found, Pa." Forrest ruffled the boy's hair, his throat tight with emotion. "So am I, son. So am I." As the children grew, the ranch expanded to accommodate their needs. Forrest built a larger house when the twins arrived, with bedrooms for the boys and girls and a spacious kitchen where Charlotte could cook for their growing family. They added a schoolroom where Charlotte taught the children their letters and numbers until they were old enough to ride into town for proper schooling. Life wasn't without its challenges. Droughts came, threatening their livelihood. Sickness visited occasionally. A terrifying week, when a leaner contracted scarlet fever, had the whole family on their knees in prayer. And as the Arizona territory grew more settled, there were disputes over land and water rights that required Forrest's diplomatic skills to navigate. Through it all, the foundation remained steady: the love between Forrest and Charlotte, the family they had built together from the most unexpected beginning. It was on their 15th wedding anniversary that Forrest surprised Charlotte with a gift that brought her to tears. He led her to the barn, the very place where they had first met, now expanded and improved but still recognizable as the shelter where Nathaniel had come into the world. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to a corner where an object stood covered with a canvas cloth. When he pulled the cloth away, Charlotte gasped. Beneath it was a cradle, intricately carved from rich, dark wood. "Forrest," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "I made it from the wood of the old apple tree that fell last year," he explained. "Look closer." Charlotte bent to examine the cradle and saw the carving on the headboard, a detailed scene of a barn during a storm with a tiny star above it. "It's that night," she realized. "The night Nathaniel was born." Forrest nodded. "The night our family began. I thought perhaps one day our grandchildren might sleep in it." Charlotte turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. At 42, Forrest's dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, his face weathered from years working under the Arizona sun. But his green eyes still held the same kindness that had comforted her on that terrifying night 16 years ago. "I love you, Forrest Hayes," she said simply, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Thank you for finding me that night, for delivering our son, for becoming his father and mine." Forrest wrapped his arms around his wife, holding her close in the golden light filtering through the barn windows. "Thank you for staying," he murmured against her hair, "for making a lonely rancher the richest man in the Arizona territory." As they stood together in the place where their journey had begun, the sounds of their children's laughter drifted from the house: Nathaniel's deep chuckle, Eleanor's musical giggle, Michael's boisterous guffaw, and the twins' identical peals of delight. It was the soundtrack of their life together, a harmony born from that discordant night of storm and pain and miracle. Outside, the Arizona sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, the same colors that had greeted them on that first morning after Nathaniel's birth. The Hayes Ranch stretched out before them, not just the land and buildings but the life they had cultivated together, rooted in that chance encounter in a storm-lashed barn. From the unexpected discovery of a woman in labor to the delivery of a child who would become his son in every way that mattered, Forrest Hayes had found his destiny on a night when he'd simply sought shelter from a storm. And in the years since, he and Charlotte had built something remarkable, a family founded not on blood but on choice, on love that had weathered every season and grown stronger with each passing year. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Forrest took Charlotte's hand and led her back toward the house, toward their children, toward the future they continued to build together. And in the gathering dusk, the cradle waited, a testament to beginnings and the endless possibilities that come from opening your heart to the unexpected. The years continued to flow by, marking the passage of time with the growth of children, the changing of seasons, and the deepening of love. Nathaniel turned 18 in 1895, a young man now with his mother's compassion and his father's steady determination. He had inherited Forrest's knack with horses and had started breeding and training his own stock on a corner of the Hayes land. "I've been thinking about my future, Pa," Nathaniel said one evening as he and Forrest sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. At 18, he was already as tall as Forrest, with broad shoulders shaped by years of ranch work. Forrest nodded, sipping his coffee. "I figured you might be. You're a man now." "I want to stay here," Nathaniel said, his voice firm with certainty. "Not in the main house. I know you and Ma need the space for the younger ones, but maybe I could build a small place near the east pasture. Run my horse operation as part of the ranch." Forrest felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had worried that his eldest might feel the pull of distant horizons, as so many young men did. "The east pasture has good water," he said, keeping his voice casual despite the emotion welling in his chest. "Good grazing. We could start marking out the foundations next week." Nathaniel's grin, so like his mother's, flashed in the gathering dusk. "Thanks, Pa." Inside the house, Charlotte was helping 14-year-old Helena with her studies. The girl had shown a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and science, devouring books that Forrest had to special order from as far away as San Francisco. "I don't see why I can't go to that women's college in California," Helena was saying, her green eyes the same shade as Forrest's, flashing with determination. "Marjorie Jenkins's older sister went, and she's going to be a teacher." Charlotte exchanged a look with 12-year-old Michael, who rolled his eyes dramatically before returning to his own schoolwork. The twins, Sarah and Hannah, now 10 years old, were seated at the other end of the table, heads bent over their primers. "We'll discuss it with your father," Charlotte said diplomatically, "but college is expensive, Ellie, and it's very far away." "I'll earn the money," Helena declared. "I've been saving from selling my quilts in town, and I can work more. Please, Ma, I want to learn everything I can." Charlotte sighed, recognizing the same determination that had carried her through her own darkest days. "We'll talk to your father," she repeated, but with a smile that made Helena's face light up with hope. Later that night, as Charlotte and Forrest prepared for bed, she told him about Helena's ambitions. "College," Forrest said, surprise evident in his voice. "In California," Charlotte nodded, watching him carefully. "She's bright, Forrest, brighter than any of us, I think. And she has dreams bigger than old Tucson." Forrest was quiet for a long moment, sitting on the edge of the bed they'd shared for 16 years. "My daughter at college," he finally said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Learning things I can't even name." He looked up at Charlotte. "If that's what she wants, we'll find a way." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as she sat beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You are a remarkable man, Forrest Hayes. Most fathers would insist their daughters stay close to home, marry young." Forrest shook his head. "Not our Ellie. She's got fire in her like her mother." He squeezed Charlotte's hand. "Besides, education is never wasted. If she goes to college and then decides to come back here and marry some local boy, she'll be the smartest rancher's wife in the territory." Charlotte laughed softly. "And if she decides to become a doctor or a professor, then she'll be the first Hayes to do so," Forrest said simply. "And I'll be proud to tell everyone my daughter is changing the world." As they settled into bed, Charlotte curled against Forrest's side in the familiar way that still brought comfort after all their years together. "Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I hadn't found your barn that night," she murmured. "If I'd kept walking, tried to make it to town." Forrest tightened his arm around her. "You would have been fine," he said. "You're the strongest woman I know, Charlotte Hayes." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but Nathaniel and I wouldn't have you. The children wouldn't exist. This life we've built, none of it would be." Forrest kissed the top of her head. "Then I thank God every day for that storm that drove you to my door." The next few years brought changes both expected and surprising to the Hayes family. True to his word, Forrest helped Nathaniel build a small but sturdy house near the east pasture. The young man's horse breeding business flourished, his careful eye for bloodlines and gentle hand, with training earning him a reputation that spread beyond Old Tucson. Helena, after much discussion and careful financial planning, did indeed go to college in California. Her departure was marked by tears from her younger siblings and a stoic farewell from Forrest, who held his eldest daughter tightly before helping her onto the westbound train. "Make us proud," he whispered in her ear. "I will, Pa," she promised, her eyes bright with tears and excitement. Michael, quieter than his sisters but with a sharp mind, revealed an unexpected talent for carpentry, and began an apprenticeship with the furniture maker in Old Tucson while still helping on the ranch. The twins, Sarah and Hannah, grew into lovely young women who, despite their identical appearance, had distinctly different personalities. Sarah practical and domestic like her mother, Hannah dreamy and artistic. Through it all, Charlotte and Forrest remained the steady center of the family, their love deepening with each passing year. There were arguments, of course, and times when the challenges of ranch life tested their patience. But the foundation laid on that stormy night in 1877 proved unshakable, a bedrock upon which their family continued to build. It was in the spring of 1900, as the new century dawned, that Nathaniel brought a young woman to Sunday dinner at the main house. Jessica Cooper was the new schoolteacher in Old Tucson, a pretty, soft-spoken woman with intelligent brown eyes and a ready laugh that seemed to brighten Nathaniel's face whenever he heard it. "Miss Cooper and I have been courting for 3 months now," Nathaniel announced as the family sat around the large dining table Forrest had built when the twins were born. "I've asked her to marry me, and she said yes." Exclamations of delight erupted from around the table. Charlotte rose to embrace the young woman who would become her daughter-in-law, her eyes meeting Forrest's over Jessica's shoulder. The look they exchanged held decades of shared history, the knowledge of how their own unusual beginning had led to this moment. Later, as Forrest and Nathaniel walked Jessica back to the boarding house in town, the young man hung back slightly, letting his father and fiancée walk ahead. "What is it, son?" Forrest asked when they returned, finding Nathaniel sitting on the porch steps, looking thoughtful. "I was thinking about what to tell our children someday," Nathaniel said. "About how I came into this world, about who I am." Forrest settled beside his son, the boards of the porch creaking beneath his weight. "The truth is always best," he said. "That you were born during a storm, that your birth father loved your mother and had dreams for you both, but that fate had other plans." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "And that you found us and saved us." "That's putting it strongly," Forrest demurred. "Your mother did all the hard work. I just caught you when you arrived. And then became my father," Nathaniel added, "not because you had to, but because you chose to." Forrest felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Best choice I ever made," he said gruffly. Nathaniel turned to look at him, the boy who had grown into a man under Forrest's guidance. "I hope I can be half the father to my children that you've been to me," he said simply. Forrest had to blink back tears as he clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. "You will be," he assured him. "You've got a good heart, Nathaniel Hayes. That's what matters most." The wedding was held that fall, a joyous occasion that brought Helena back from California and drew friends and neighbors from miles around. As Forrest watched Nathaniel stand tall and proud beside his bride, he couldn't help but remember the tiny, red-faced infant he had delivered in the hayloft 23 years earlier. "You're crying," Charlotte whispered, slipping her hand into his as they watched the ceremony. "Dust in my eye," Forrest replied, but he squeezed her hand, acknowledging the emotion of the moment. "He's a good man," Charlotte said softly. "You made him that way." Forrest shook his head. "We both did," he corrected. "From that first night through every day since. We made this family together, Charlotte." As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family expanded further. Nathaniel and Jessica welcomed their first child, a son they named Forrest Daniel Hayes, honoring both the father who had raised Nathaniel and the one whose blood ran in his veins. Helena completed her education, and to everyone's surprise, returned to Arizona not as a teacher as expected but as one of the territory's first female doctors, opening a practice in Tucson. Michael married the furniture maker's daughter and took over the business when his father-in-law retired, while continuing to create beautiful pieces for the ranch house. The twins found their own paths, Sarah marrying a neighboring rancher, and Hannah moving to Phoenix to teach art. For Forrest and Charlotte, now in their 50s, the ranch remained the heart of their world, though they gradually turned more of its operation over to Nathaniel and the capable hands they employed. Their home, once filled with the chaos and laughter of 5 children, became quieter but no less warm, often hosting grandchildren for extended stays and family gatherings that grew larger with each passing year. On the 40th anniversary of Nathaniel's birth, that stormy April night that had changed everything, the entire Hayes family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 4 generations sat around tables set up in the yard, from Forrest and Charlotte to their newest great-grandchild, just 3 months old. As the sun began to set, Nathaniel stood and called for attention, raising his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled family. "To my parents, Forrest and Charlotte Hayes, who taught all of us the meaning of family." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. 40 years ago tonight," Nathaniel continued, "a storm brought my mother to a barn on this very land. She was alone, frightened, and about to deliver a child." He looked at Forrest, his expression solemn. "A stranger found her there, a man who could have turned her away or gone for help, leaving her to face her ordeal alone. Instead, he stayed. He delivered her baby me, and in doing so, delivered himself into a life he never expected." Charlotte reached for Forrest's hand, holding it tightly as their son spoke. "That night in that barn, a family was born," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not through blood but through choice, through love. Through the kind of courage that sees what needs to be done and does it, regardless of the cost or complication." He raised his glass higher. "To Forrest and Charlotte Hayes, who taught us that family isn't about who you're born to but who you're born for. To 40 years of love, sacrifice, and joy." "To Forrest and Charlotte," echoed the family, glasses raised in the golden light of the setting sun. As the evening deepened into night, the younger children were put to bed in the main house and the various outbuildings that now dotted the expanded Hayes Ranch. The adults lingered around the fire, sharing stories and memories that wove together the tapestry of their shared history. Eventually, Forrest and Charlotte slipped away, walking hand in hand toward the old barn renovated and expanded over the years, but still standing where it all began. They entered quietly, the familiar smells of hay and horses greeting them like old friends. 40 years, Forrest mused, looking around at the sturdy beams and walls that had sheltered them through so much. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Charlotte nodded, her silver-streaked hair catching the light from the lantern Forrest had brought. "And sometimes it feels like we've always been here, always been together." They climbed to the hayloft, moving more slowly now but still agile enough to make the ascent. At the top, Forrest spread a blanket he had brought and they sat together, looking out through the small window at the stars scattered across the Arizona sky. "Did you ever imagine that night what would come of it?" Charlotte asked, leaning against his shoulder. "When you found a stranger about to give birth in your barn," Forrest chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "I was too terrified to imagine anything beyond getting through the next hour without disaster," he admitted. "But later, that first morning when I saw you feeding Nathaniel, something in me knew. Not the details, not the decades of life we'd share, but I knew I wanted you both in my life somehow." Charlotte smiled, turning to look into the face she had loved for so long, the lines etched by years of sun and laughter, the green eyes still bright with the same kindness that had comforted her on her darkest night. "You saved us, Forrest Hayes." Forrest shook his head, pulling her closer. "No, Charlotte, you saved me. I was alone here, just existing. You and Nathaniel, you gave me purpose, gave me joy." He brushed a kiss against her temple. You made this place a home." As they sat together in the quiet darkness, the sounds of their extended family's laughter drifting from the house, Forrest and Charlotte Hayes held each other close. Two people whose lives had intersected by chance, but who had chosen, every day since, to walk the same path together. The storm that had brought them together had long since passed, but the life it had birthed continued to flourish in their children and grandchildren, in the prosperous ranch that bore their name, and in the love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning into something enduring and true. And high above, the stars that had witnessed their first meeting continued to shine, eternal witnesses to the power of a single act of kindness, a stranger's choice to help a woman in need, to deliver her child, and in doing so, to become its father and find his own heart's home in the process.